So just to simplify the illustration a little bit more, here we have two developers. There's ourselves and there's the second developer. And basically we're both working on the same repository and we're both basically pushing our commits to the same repository from working locally with VCS. Now let's talk a little bit about what happens when we're ready to deploy this site. Now, as you know, we've just been working on Git and GitHub. This doesn't provide a hosting facility. Now, of course, as we've discussed previously, in order to actually host your websites, to see your website go live, you'd need a hosting provider. Now, that hosting provider would just have a server that's available to them, and the server would be where your website comes from, where your website is stored, and where your visitors would be accessing your website from. Now, a server, like we said, is just like a computer. It has hard drives, it has RAM, it has CPUs, has all of that stuff. And of course, because it's just like a computer, it also has an operating system, and it has an operating system with folders and all of that kind of stuff. So your website would actually just sit within a folder on the server. So here's our server, and our website is sitting on the server in a folder, and we're just going to call this folder www/my site. Now, what we would effectively need to do is access this server and then get the website from GitHub onto the server. Now, we've already seen how to do that when we had our second developer into the development model. They cloned the website at that point in time, and they were able to get a working version of that website up and running on their local hard drive. We're going to use a similar technique here. But before we actually do that, we've got to first access that server. Now, you probably, as the developer, won't have physical access to the server unless you're working in a company that has their own servers, which is perhaps a little bit of a dated model these days. But let's say, for example, your server was sitting somewhere else in the world, you would need to basically have access or gain access to that server. Now, in order to access that server, what you would usually utilize is secure shell. So SSH provides us with an interface for accessing a remote computer's command prompt or terminal. So as you've seen previously, or as you will see a bit later, we'll be utilizing the command prompt quite extensively with Git. So the command prompt just provides us with an interface that we can communicate directly with the operating system without having to use buttons and GUI elements and stuff like that. So we would just open up a command shell or command prompt and utilize SSH on our computer to go via the internet. So we're not talking about GitHub right now. We're just talking about going via the internet, and there's my representation of the world. So go via the internet to get to this particular server. So SSH, we would just basically go SSH at, and then whatever our login is, and then it would be something to the effect of whatever the HTTP, whatever the IP address or URL of that website is. So the SSH command is not terribly important at this point in time. What's relevant there is that we would be utilizing SSH and we would have all of that information provided to us by our host with regards to how to access that server. So we would use SSH to log into that server, and then we would have potentially this directory already created. So we would just be able to navigate to that directory. We can navigate to that directory using the cd command. We'll have a look a bit later at what cd is. And if we're not, then we just create that directory on the server. And then once we are in that directory, we can go ahead and clone the Git project. So just like our second developer cloned this project at this point in time, we could go ahead and connect to GitHub and make sure that we have pulled our file, our website, onto the server by cloning it. So therefore, we will have our website in its completed version taken from GitHub, not from our local hard drive, because our local hard drive would just contain the work that we did and not necessarily contain the work that other developers have contributed to the website. So we would go ahead and clone it from the remote GitHub repository, not our Git repository, but the remote GitHub repository. Effectively, what that means is if we wanted to do some more work on the website, we would need to make sure that we go ahead and push those new changes to GitHub. Once those new changes are pushed, we don't need to clone we don't need to clone the website again because the website's already been cloned on the server. What we would then do is we would just go ahead and via GitHub, we would just pull the website onto the server. So we would pull those new changes onto the server, and then that via DNS. And remember, DNS is the domain name server. It will tell your visitor where to find this website online. Via DNS, your website will be served. So here's our users, and this is what our user is accessing. So as you can see, the process is actually has got quite a few different steps to it. But when we get into the hang of working, when we get used to working with Git and GitHub, you'll find that there are many benefits, particularly when you work in a team using VCS.